we've been considering for the past two chapters the nations of Egypt and Ethiopia. 2 chapters ago, in chapter 18, we looked at the burden placed on Egypt, and then the last chapter we noticed not a burden, but just simply some words written to the nation of Ethiopia. The burdens that have been discussed for the past several chapters will continue in the next chapter, which is chapter 21. But here in chapter 20, we have just 6 verses that basically serves as kind of a coda, a nice little closing remarks about Egypt and Ethiopia. As I say, it's only 6 verses, but they're packed full of interesting information and material that is worth considering. So let's take it on a verse-by-verse basis. It starts in verse 1 with the prophet writing, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod and took it." Of course, there's more to be said to finish that sentence, but just here at the beginning, we have several critical pieces of information. First of all, as a contrast to the previous few chapters, we have a specific time frame established by Isaiah the author. He says it happened in the year that Tartan of Assyria came and basically knocked down a rebellion of Ashdod. Ashdod, which is a city of the Philistines on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, north of Ashkelon and south of Mount Carmel, and almost directly due west of Bethlehem. And so it belonged to Assyria. Assyria had conquered that region, but the very fortified, well-inhabited city of Ashdod, probably the most fortified city of the Philistia area, rose up in a rebellion. And thus this is the time period when Assyria sent Tartan. Tartan is not a name, it's a title. Tartan is the title for the second in command of the Assyrian army. This is the number 2 guy in Assyria, and he sends personally himself, sent by King Sargon, who is the grandson of Tiglath-Pileser III, sends, Sargon does, this Tartar, or rather this Tartan. Tartar is a city. Tartan is the second in command of Assyria, who comes in and basically quells this rebellion. It seems to be the case, it's implied in the text, that Egypt and Ethiopia were expected to send either supplies or troops or some kind of aid and assistance to Ashdod to help fight against the Assyrian attack. But for some reason or another they did not do so. So with Ashdod now fully defeated, Assyria now is going to set her sights on Egypt, and then southern of them, Assyria. And so all in the midst of this, you have Judah, who is this little nation here in the middle, with Assyria having conquered here, Assyria having conquered here, and Assyria even going down into Egypt and Ethiopia. They're becoming surrounded. And so they're naturally panicking by this great and powerful empire that is just almost putting them in an anaconda vice, just choking the life out of them. And so, being typical of Judah, they've not turned to God. They are seeking alliances with nations around them, which is kind of a repeat from the study we had several chapters ago in chapter 7. And like in chapter 7, they're seeking an alliance with Egypt and with Ethiopia, who just so happen to be the 2 nations discussed in the previous 2 chapters. So God has His prophet deliver a message to His people in a very unconventional way to inform them that they should not put their faith and trust in Egypt and Ethiopia. That they should not trust those nations to help them, because they're going to have their own problems. And that message is delivered, as I said, unconventionally in the next few verses. Verse 2 of chapter 20. "At the same time spoke the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot." The same time as all of this attack of Ashdod and progression toward Egypt and Ethiopia was taking place and about to take place. That same time, which would be about 713 or so BC. Okay? At that same time, God tells Isaiah, His prophet, to take his sackcloth from off his loins. His loins would be the cloth of his undergarment. So take the sackcloth off. Sackcloth, of course, is the famous traditional garb of mourning. You put that on as a symbol for those around you, kind of the way in a few generations ago people wore a black band on their arm as a symbol for those around them to know this person's in mourning. Well, Isaiah had been wearing sackcloth. It's not directly said, but it's pretty obvious why. It's been a constant reason for Isaiah's lamenting throughout the book, and that is the failure of his people Judah to turn to God and stop trying to find help all around them and to start finding help from above. And so he had been upset over his people and their unwillingness to trust God, and so he was wearing sackcloth. So God tells him, take off the sackcloth. And in fact, take it off and put nothing else on. To just take off the sackcloth and do something about your mourning. You're upset that people aren't turning to God? Do something about it. Take to the streets and tell people to turn to God. And so to do that, he tells the prophet, take off the sackcloth and take off your shoes. And the Bible says that would make him naked and barefoot, but he's not naked in the literal sense. He has his undergarment on. A Jew would consider you naked if all you had on was your skivvies. So that's the condition here. In fact, it's obvious that's the condition for two reasons. One which will be given in a few verses. The other one is the fact that he tells him, go naked and barefoot. If you're literally completely naked, barefoot is implied. So it's clear he's saying, you take off this outer garment, and instead of replacing it with another outer garment, you just don't replace it. You just keep your undergarment on, and then keep your shoes off. And that's going to symbolize something. You're going to be a walking metaphor for God's people to see. As he says in verse 3, the Lord said, like as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder. You're going to be a visual metaphor. For a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia. Isaiah is walking naked and barefoot, or in his undergarment without shoes on, all around Jerusalem, all around Judah for 3 years. Why? To make the point that this is not just a guy who's lost his mind. This is not just a guy who wants to cool off in the heat of the day, so he takes off his outer garment. This is a symbol from God. So for 3 years he will do this. It will be a sign and a wonder concerning Egypt and Ethiopia, two nations that God's people are seeking an alliance with at this moment. And the message from this visualization, this depiction of Isaiah, is found in verse 3 and 4. Just like Isaiah walked for 3 years, verse 4, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners. For 3 years they will be taken away from their homeland captive and moved over to Assyria as slaves. So they themselves will also walk naked and barefoot. And so Isaiah for 3 years became a visual for his people. When they looked at Isaiah, Isaiah would turn around and say, do you see me? I represent your hope. You're putting your hope and your trust and your expectation in Egypt. Look at Egypt. Egypt is this downtrodden, defeated, in his underwear and barefoot, poor guy walking the streets. That's who you're putting your faith in. You're putting your trust in me, or rather in Ethiopia, but that's what I look like. That's what they will look like. This stripped down, no pun intended, completely homeless person just walking aimlessly. That's Ethiopia. That's who you're putting your trust in, Judah. Shame on you. The king of Assyria, verse 4 again, is going to lead away Egyptians as prisoners, take them captive. The Ethiopian as captives, take them prisoner. Young and old, sparing no kind of person. It's going to be an entire nation. In other words, not just soldiers, but everyone. Naked and barefoot, but then he adds, even with their buttocks, that means what it means, uncovered. In other words, Isaiah is walking around with some sense of decency. His depiction, his visual metaphor wasn't supposed to be lewd. It wasn't supposed to be a shock value. In fact, it was not uncommon for people to wear no outer garment if they were working out in the day. But to do it for 3 years straight, that's the point. No, but this is beyond just not having an outer garment. This is not having anything to wear. You see, Isaiah had undergarments. He could have put an outer garment on. Egypt will have nothing. They will be so completely defeated. They will have no clothes at all, not even undergarments. They will be stripped. They will be completely naked, down to their, he says, buttocks. They will be buttocks naked, uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. Of course, it's a shameful thing if you don't have any clothes. And so Isaiah is walking and he's saying, I am the depiction of what you're putting your hope in. Except this isn't even as bad as it is, because at least I have underwear. And that's who you're trusting. Verse 5. And they is Judah, who's putting their trust in Egypt and Ethiopia. They shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. Right now, Judah is putting their expectation in Ethiopia. We expect them to come to our aid. We expect them to help us defeat Assyria. But your expectation is going to be walking around naked on their way to captivity in Assyria. Well, we have our hope in the glory of Egypt. Egypt, this great, powerful nation. They had us in captivity, Judah can say. They had Israel in captivity in the time of the Exodus. So this great and glorious nation, they're going to be our hope. They're going to be our help. Well, the glory of Egypt is going to be a captive citizen stripped down naked and marching to a new homeland in captivity. They are not your help. They are not your aid. Verse 6, and when that happens, when Assyria has come in, they've conquered Ashdod, when they continue southward, and they go all the way into Egypt and conquer them, and they go down to Ethiopia and conquer them, when that happens, verse 6, the inhabitant of this isle, that would be the coastline, that entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea, Ashdod, Ascalon, and so on, the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, behold, such is our expectation. They will see the naked, defeated citizens of Egypt marching away, and they'll say, there goes my expectation for victory. Whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria? Where will we go to run? Where can we run to? Can we run to Ethiopia? There goes the Ethiopians, butt naked and walking across the road from Egypt and Ethiopia all the way to Assyria in captivity. There goes our hope. Where shall we flee to? Not there. How shall we escape Assyria? Think about it. Assyria, here's Judah. Assyria has conquered all of this. Here, down here is sea. You've got nothing here. You've got the Red Sea and you've got the ocean. And here you have Assyria, the landmass. Assyria has taken all of this. You are completely surrounded. There is nowhere you can go. Isaiah's point is to say, stop looking to your left and to your right. Stop looking to your north and to your south. Assyria has conquered your north, south, east, and west. Judah, you're surrounded. Stop looking around. Start looking up. But they refused to see that simple solution. And by the time they finally did, it was too late. Well, that ends this interesting short little chapter. We're going to pick up with a new burden in chapter 21. The way it is worded in verse 1 is the burden of the desert or the sea. So we'll consider what that means and what this burden is about in chapter 21 this time next time. Until then, thank you very much.